Welcome back to the Kentucky History Podcast. I'm your host, Jameson Cable, and I'm here with another great Kentucky episode. We have joining us today Mr. Jason French from the Behringer-Crawford Museum in Northern Kentucky. How you doing?
Oh, I'm very well.
Good, good. We're going to get into some good Kentucky history, especially up in the northern part. But first, before we do any of that, tell us a little bit about your Kentucky connection and so forth.
Well, like so many Kentuckians, your family started out somewhere else in the state, and sometimes maybe moved out of the mountains like my family did to come up to where there was work along the Ohio River. And then I was actually raised in Ohio, unfortunately. But I was wise enough when I had my own ability to move back into a proper state, the good Commonwealth of Kentucky. But my stock's all from Letcher County and Greenup and kind of the eastern area of Kentucky, and it's a history that I'm very proud of.
hmm Well, we will not hold that against you for your brief stint in Ohio. The fact that you redeemed yourself and came back, voids it all. So you're good to go.
Well, I figure it could be worse. It could be Indiana or West Virginia.
Oh, true, true. And if you're and if you're listening from Indiana or West Virginia, well, we're not sorry, I guess.
No, it's all in love.
Oh, so anyway, let moving on to our topic. Let's get into a little bit of Kenton County history. It's named after Simon Kenton, great frontiersman, and as is up there in the northern part of the state. When we think about early settlers, or let's say pre-European settlers, who are we talking about? Who's in the area? Who's back and forth?
Well, certainly pre-contact, at least European contact, there are a number of groups that we now are going to call Adena or Hopewell, Fort Ancient native cultures. Um, we're not sure what they call themselves. Um, there's a chance that the Fort Ancient, which were right up until contact, are the groups that some of the people that we would think of as the Miami Indians or natives. It's interesting because as I've been kind of studying this more recently, there was really I never fully understood the scope of the apocalyptic changes in North America within native cultures after the Spanish brought
hmm
disease. When we think about in Europe, got the Black Death that killed, giant populations of Europe. Well, you've got something in North America that killed more people um, with the European diseases that the Spanish brought. Um, and you've just, so it's for a couple of centuries, or at least a solid century and a half, it was a little bit like a Stone Age version of a Mad Max world,
hmm
where just there was a rebuilding of cultures and civilizations. So often, disease takes out the people who are older and have the knowledge. So, um, the native groups that were living here, the mound building cultures, there was so much of that. They had fabric, they had a lot of different things that we don't think about, and we didn't really see when the likes of maybe the French with LaSalle, or later the English and guys like Christopher Gist, who
hmm
came through the area in 1750. Um, they're seeing LaSalle or LaSalle's brother, depending on um, who actually was in the region at the time. In the 1680s, most of the villages that we can find archaeologically, they were all
Mhm.
gone. Um, they were there, but from that say 1580 period to 1680, there was this dying off of the population, and you couldn't. They just couldn't maintain the villages, or they were just all gone. So there's after that, the survivors are in they're growing new cultures, different aspects of their religion, and they're migrating throughout the country. And you get certain groups are able to do that um, more
Mhm.
effectively, quicker. In the East, you get the Iroquois Confederation and everything. So once you start in the late 17th century and into the 18th century, with European fur trade through the French and the English. The Dutch were there for a little bit too. You start really um, seeing the groups that we are more familiar with from, whether we've read Alan Eckert, whether we've read uh, uh, Fenimore Cooper and the Last of the Mohicans, or any of the kind of the historic novels, um, or if you're just studying the native groups. So by settlement, there's not by European settlement, mid 18th century, most of the native groups were not living in northern Kentucky at that time. There was some activity. There was because what northern Kentucky has that literally for thousands and thousands of years was extremely important to moving into Kentucky is the Licking
Mhm.
River. So the Licking, um, as we call it today, and I recently had learned the native name for the Licking, and forgive me, it slipped my
That's
mind
all
right now. Um, uh, but uh, the Licking was just the same as the Ohio River was this commerce um, superhighway for trade going back thousands of years. The Licking was the way to get into the interior of Kentucky and to those all important salt licks where the game was going to
Mhm.
be. Whether that is on the Licking, you've got lower and upper Blue Licks, you've got all of these mineral springs, and then for us in northern Kentucky, not Kenton County, um, uh, there's, of course, Big Bone Lick, which is extremely important in northern Kentucky. So those are kind of the groups of people, and we see that in archaeology. When you're digging along the Licking, there's just thousands of years of artifacts because there were thousands of years of people using the Licking to get into the interior to hunt.
Yeah.
And by settlement period, by European settlement period, um, Kentucky had kind of been used as a little bit of a shared hunting resource, um, at least in our
Mhm.
region. Uh, so I'm sure there were temporary villages here or there, but for the most part, it was kind of a communal hunting grounds, a border
Yeah.
area, and you can see that in other areas where there's stronger groups of natives. Sometimes they've got a buffer between
Mhm.
them um, that is a shared hunting
Yeah.
resource. And I think mid 18th century and early 18th century, Kentucky had kind of had that area, and certainly northern
Mhm.
Kentucky.
Yeah, and so you mentioned settlement or European settlement, and just for so people know, Kenton County was founded in 1840. Now, the state, however, was founded good little bit before that. Um, and as everybody knows, there's about
1792, if I'm not
yeah,
mistaken.
yeah,
But
yeah. So a lot of settlement obviously going on in that area, but way before Kenton County was formed. Just to give people some geographic knowledge as well, you got Campbell County, Pendleton County, Grant County, and Boone County, which I always find it interesting that they decided to name Boone and Kenton right next to each other as far as county goes. But um, and then of course you have Hamilton County from Ohio, and Cincinnati
right.
bordering to the north. Um, so where if you're looking to find out who was there first, which county, like, which county did, Kenton County come off of?
So Kenton County actually became a county from lands ceded to for that purpose from Campbell County.
Mhm.
So Campbell County was around first, and you had Newport Barracks and everything in Campbell County. By 1840, you're starting. Covington was founded around 1815 or so. There was a ferry that went from Cincinnati to Covington, and it was the Kennedy Ferry. Um, so there was starting to be industry in on the Covington side. People were moving out of the city because cities get crowded. The Cincinnati, just in its very nature, is basically a 3 square mile bowl of disease. Um, so, especially in the say the 19th century, um, because it's got hills around it, and then that lower basin, it just was not necessarily the healthiest place to
Mhm.
be. So, just moving across the river, which isn't even the barrier that we see it as today, because in the 19th century the Ohio River wasn't dammed
Yeah.
and dredged in the way that the river is now. It was a healthy stream, and it could be very shallow in the summers and freeze solid in the winters. Way easier. Um, but just moving across into northern Kentucky was a healthier prospect. So people were either staying in northern Kentucky, not moving into the city, because it could, if you wanted to work in the city, you could very easily. It's easier once there was a bridge
Yep.
built, but there were ferries. You could row a boat across, and as long as the water wasn't too deep in the springs or the spring tide necessarily, as you would call, that's when you're going to want to ship things downriver. So Covington kind of gets its start and grows, and there's some of the other communities like Ludlow on in Kenton County. They're their own little communities, but Covington's growing to the point where one of the funny things with our county, Kenton County, is the original county seat was in the center of the county, um, and that's Independence, Kentucky. Um, well, as Covington grew and more industry and everything was there was a decision to make Covington also the county seat. So in all of Kentucky, there's one county that has two legal county seats, and that is Kenton County, which is you know, I promise we're not bipolar. Um, but it's a really interesting little tidbit. It's also one of the things that I find um, Covington's got a lot of
Mhm.
history, a lot of interesting history. In regards to around the Civil War, um, you've got, of course, the Roebling suspension bridge, um, which for a spell was the longest suspension bridge in the country until they built the Brooklyn Bridge. Um, uh, and that was being built during, started before the Civil
Mhm.
War, was finished after the Civil War, was halted for fear that Confederate armies would use the bridge to invade in
Mhm.
Cincinnati. And that seems ludicrous, but actually, in September of 1863, there was a Confederate army advancing on Covington, Kentucky, and it got within
Mm.
5 miles of the city proper. Um, when they looked at the defensive perimeter that was being built around us, it wasn't necessarily. It may have been a little smoke and mirrors at that time, um, but they looked at the defenses and thought that this was going to be probably
Uh-huh.
unpleasant. We'll say it may. And then I don't, they changed their mind. I'm not going to say retreated, but they left the area. There was a few small little skirmishes, but ultimately it wasn't until
Mhm.
Perryville um, that that battle happened between the Union forces and the Confederate forces that would have been happening in northern Kentucky and in Covington and ultimately into Cincinnati. And the whole region was very divided in
Mhm.
allegiance. Um, very much so, to the point where um, the man who was the president of the suspension bridge company that was building the suspension bridge between Covington and Cincinnati was a man named Henry Bruce. Henry Bruce, um, his alliances were Confederate uh, to to the extreme where he was a wealthy Northern Kentuckian. When John Hunt Morgan had been captured and was being held in the Ohio State Penitentiary in Columbus, Ohio, Henry Bruce um, he put up the gold to bribe the guards to allow John Hunt Morgan to escape. When the Union forces caught wind of that, he had to leave his home in Covington very quickly and run to
Wow.
Canada. Um, so he abandoned his suspension bridge company. Well, another man on his suspension bridge company board was a man named Amos Schenkel. Well, Amos Schenkel was Union. And his family was Union, and they were part of like the local Covington militia, Union militia. And Schenkel is the one that led the suspension bridge company to the finishing of the construction of the bridge in 1867 or so. So there was very much divided allegiances in northern Kentucky, and I often think about had we sometimes when we do the what if
Yeah.
history, what would have happened had the Confederate Army decided to attack um, our region. No, not just the northern Kentucky part at the time, but across the river. That was the sixth largest city in the United States and the largest inland city. It would have been street fighting, block to block, house to house, neighbor against neighbor, with hundreds of thousands of people.
Wow.
Um, and it would have been by far the worst battle
Mhm.
in just casualties, destruction in the Civil War. Um, because nothing had happened. When we think about the burning of Atlanta or someplace, Atlanta was pretty small back
Mhm.
then. Yeah, Atlanta got burned, and Sherman somehow managed to burn half of Georgia. Um, probably personally. But so it's an interesting what if moment. Northern Kentucky's got a number of those kind of little quirks. One of the businesses that we talk a lot about at our museum is Hemingray
Mhm.
Glass. Hemingray is a pattern glass company. Most people will be familiar with Hemingray, especially in our region, if they've got a telegraph insulator laying around somewhere at their house. There's a good chance it's going to say Hemingray, Covington,
Wow.
Kentucky. So Hemingray made its fortune mainly on telegraph insulators, and it was in downtown Covington, right on the Ohio River. Um, and there's a lot of different industries. There was furniture factories. Um, of course, you get the
Mhm.
politics because the city of Covington wants to annex the city of West Covington, and there's all of that fun stuff. There's a there's a pretty famous Kentuckian who was
Mhm.
governor,
Mhm. Mhm.
kind of,
Yeah.
a guy named Goebel. Um, Goebel's an interesting character, and he's from
Mhm.
Covington, um, and it's fun. Uh, it's sometimes hard as a historian to not look back at somebody with kind of the modern understanding of
Mhm.
psychology and whatever else, and go, well, that person was clearly on the spectrum. Um, you know, Goebbels a very interesting character. He was born, I believe, in the
Mhm.
1870s of German immigrant
I'll
stock.
I'll I'll show you too,
Um,
well, if it works. Uh, yeah,
oh
one
yeah,
of the books.
yeah, got a little very interesting guy, very feisty. Um, One of my favorite Goebbels stories is, he was into some
Mhm.
stuff, and his political. There was I can't believe anyone would think that politicians and cronyism and gerrymandering and whatever else. It's definitely not a new thing because Goebel was doing a lot of that. Whether or not he was, his personality was such. I feel like he was probably put up to a lot of stuff. Maybe a little bit of a the bulldog for his party
Mhm.
for a while. He was doing good things. He was representing wounded railway workers, people who had been injured, to get the railway to pay for their injuries. If you got ran over by a train and you're missing legs, used to be you just got fired. Like, sorry, you move out of the house, you're out. You're out. Uh, but Goebel really would sink his teeth into it and
Mhm.
sue him. He was a lawyer, um, but he also ended up in state politics. Uh, and sometime it was, I believe, 1895. Um, there was a lot of state politicians from Northern Kentucky at the time.
Mhm.
Now Kenton County is the third most populated county in the state.
Mhm.
Um, but at the time, there were a lot of state politicians in Northern Kentucky in the 1890 period, and in Kenton County, and he and there was a lot of business with the banks. There was a lot of state business with the banks in Northern Kentucky. Well, Goebel had a rival um, who was an old Confederate officer who was president of a bank in Northern Kentucky, um, named, I believe, John Sanford. And I don't know why they hated each other so much. They were both politically aligned in the same party, um, but there was no love between them. And Goebel, being the man with maybe less of a filter than he should have had, um, once wrote in a northern Kentucky paper, um, anonymously for whatever reason, and referred to Mr. Sanford as Gonorrhea John. Um,
Oh.
well, Sanford didn't necessarily take that
He didn't
kindly.
like that name.
Um, he didn't like it for whatever reason. Was not fond of that name. So in uh, I believe 1895, Goebel and the Attorney General of the state, who was one of his buddies, and a couple other guys, they were walking up Madison Avenue in Covington, and they're moving money from different banks in Covington to other banks that's more favorable to them for
Mhm.
whatever reason. So they're moving state money. Well, Sanford is standing out on the steps of his uh, his bank, um, and I believe it's probably Sixth and Madison, right in that area. And Goebel and his entourage were unable to cross the street in enough time to avoid Mr. Sanford. Sanford's leaning on the rail on his steps. He's got a coat over his hand, and he addresses the other gentleman and shakes their hands with his left hand. Then he questions Goebel about whether or not Goebel is the one that
Mhm.
actually wrote that scathing and unflattering article that referred to him as Gonorrhea John. Goebel, being a man once again without a filter and um, just an interesting character, evidently responded, "Yeah, I did that." um, and at that point in time, there was, and here's where the story is quite interesting.
Mhm.
So under that coat, Sanford had a pistol in his hand. Um, and evidently Goebel had a pistol in his coat pocket. So there was a fight in the streets of Covington in which Goebel is shot at, um, but and we're talking at 10 feet, really
Mhm.
close kind of ranges. Sanford's bullet passes through Goebel's jacket and vest. Um, Goebel's bullet lodges in Sanford's head, and Mr. Sanford eventually doesn't make it. It's hard to imagine, lead poison into the forehead's kind of hard
Yeah.
on your. So now this is a fight in broad daylight in Covington, Kentucky, where there's state politicians, including the Attorney General of the state of Kentucky, is involved in this. So they go up to the police station. Goebel turns himself in, says, "Hey, I just was in this fight."
Mhm.
There, of course, is, um, Goebel's witnesses are credible, we'll
Yeah.
say, and said, "Oh, Sanford shot first. It was in self defense. We don't want to call this a duel." Um, so, um, so there's the court case. Goebbels, it's declared self defense. It's not a duel. Sanford shot first. I question that for a number of reasons. I personally think at 10 feet away, it's really hard to miss unless there's a bullet already going through your head.
Mhm.
I kind of think that it just I think in hindsight, I would wager that it went a little
Mhm.
differently. Also, we do know in the state of Kentucky, when you um, are sworn into office, you have to promise you weren't in a
Yeah,
duel
that's
or
right.
seconded
Yeah.
in a duel. So, had the Goebel incident with Sanford been declared a duel, the attorney general
Mhm.
and Goebel would have no longer been able to
Hold office.
be in Kentucky
Yep.
politics. So, you know, for whatever reason, just for so many years later, Goebel is then running for governor, um, is defeated, uh, but then after after going, hey, thank you, congratulations, you won, and all that. People got started running the state. I think in November of '99. Uh, that's when uh, the legislative body of Kentucky decided that they didn't like the opposing party running the
Uh-huh.
state, so they were going to contest it. And all they had to do is convince Goebel to contest it. Um, so Goebel starts contesting it, and that's when his unfortunate incident
Mhm.
happened in Frankfurt, where somebody plugged
Mhm.
him, and then on his deathbed, he was made governor because you can't let that other party run the
Yeah.
state. Even though we know he's going to die, you know, we got a good lieutenant governor lined up for this one. Um, so, Northern Kentucky has fun history like that. Um,
We're going to pause right here with Jason French in our discussion about Kenton County history. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Welcome to the Kentucky History Channel, where we strive to bring you all the Kentucky history content you want and you deserve. Kentucky is a part of all of us, and we plan on covering all the history we can, from Pike County to Fulton County, from Louisville to Harlan. Here on our YouTube channel, you can find many videos dedicated to different events, people, governors, and places in Kentucky. There's something for everybody. While you're here, if you like the channel, hit the subscribe button and the notification button so you get notified anytime new Kentucky history is available. And if you want to support the channel, we have a Patreon page as well, or patreon.com/kyhistorypod. You've probably heard about Daniel Boone, but what about the rest of the frontiersmen who came to Kentucky and settled? That's what we want to bring to the Kentucky History Channel. The stories of the untold, the stories of those forgotten. One thing to expect on our channel is great Kentucky content. Some stories that you've never heard of. The Night Riders, who began in western Kentucky. Bloody Monday, the riots in Louisville. The assassination of Governor Goebel, the only governor ever assassinated in the United States. Stories from all over Kentucky, stories that are unforgettable once you've heard them. You can find out who counties in Kentucky are named after and how your county got started. From beginning to end, we plan to document every county in Kentucky, all 120. Reach out to us on all of our social media platforms. Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and also leave a comment on one of our YouTube videos. You can also check out our podcast episodes. You can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and many more. We're always seeking to find more Kentucky history so we can bring it to you. The viewers, the listeners, we want all the stories and all the events from Kentucky's great history to be told and shared everywhere.